it might not be over yet, folks, because Pierre Gasly has been talking. And he's basically said that Alpine's in shambles and needs a hero. And yeah, it's probably also a general condemnation of his own team, but it's definitely a call for help though. Two things cropped up in my news feeds over the Goodwood weekend. There is a vlog incoming, by the way, so subscribe for when that drops. That definitely helped steer my thoughts regarding Christian Horner's removal from the top seat at Red Bull Racing. First came Will Buxton's take about what would happen if Horner went to Ferrari to replace Vasseur. But let's be real, Christian is Red Bull in many ways. As noted by various journalists, including the likes of BBC's Andrew Benson, Christian and Red Bull felt like they were inseparable in a way, almost borderline delusional. And obviously, Ferrari would not stand for that sort of behaviour, as in it would make him think that he's bigger than Ferrari, and as I have said time and time again, no one is bigger than Ferrari. And you might be thinking that Lewis Hamilton is guilty of that, of thinking that he's bigger than Ferrari. Well, no, he is working closely with all of the people at Maranello to get things better, and he is an incredible force in general, but that seems to be just a byproduct of two mega brands coming together to make a super brand. And he is trying his best to integrate, even though it's going to be a very major struggle after over a decade with the Mercedes-AMG team. And Will Buxton's words regarding Horner to Ferrari were not good, saying that if that were to come to pass, then Lewis Hamilton would walk. TLDR, Will Buxton thinks that Lewis and Horner wouldn't get along, so I think that's out. I've heard Aston being floated, but Andy Cowell seems to be going well there, and it certainly is reminding me that there is a trend going on with team principals within Formula One. Gone are the super media-savvy personalities, and you're getting more technically minded, engineer-based leads that know how to try and fix a car and may have a little bit more of an understanding, a grasp of what goes into making a Formula One car. But then this next tidbit from Pierre Gasly got me thinking, and its relation into him not saying overly nice things about his team. So here they are for your consideration. This could be a little bit of a Christian Fog Horner. Ahem. I think last year we, overall performance related, relatively to the others, was in a much better place. Considering the car was in a better place, we were on the podium. It was incredible. But this year, I feel we are in a worse place. The others have a better package, and that P6 is probably as good, as I think he says, as good as it gets. It's quite clearly obvious that Pierre is very frustrated with this lot after such a good end to 2024. Because back then it looked like they turned a corner, and now they just turned another corner and they've now ended up going backwards. Now, these comments could be just him venting in general, or maybe it's just a very clear signal that he, as the team leader, is wishing for the management of Alpine and the Renault Group to get some change underway. Meaningful change, like serious change, or else he's going to be out on his bum. No one's going to be caring about Pierre Gasly in a couple of years if he remains with Alpine and then Alpine remained at the back. He'll just become anonymous. So just pay attention to those comments in general about what happens next. Either Flavio will appreciate Pierre's honesty and say, oh, well, that's very good for Pierre as the team leader. He should have every right to feel frustrated. Or he could just say, well, Pierre, you're showing the door. The door's right there, and so you leave and don't come back. But then at the same time, does Flavio still carry the same amount of clout as he did when he first took up office? Because, I mean, you've only got to look at the results right now, especially since Luca De Meo's gone, his main backer, so there's no telling about whether he'll actually still be in the job by the end of the year. Safe to say, it's not going well, is it, Briatore? So yes, Gasly's words could be part of a strategic push to get some meaningful change across the line. He's been doing this for months now. I've seen him doing this all the time, calling for the team to focus on next year first and foremost, that Alpine is ready to go and will take to the regulations with gusto instead of just going in for glory right now. Well, I don't see any glory around Enstone, do you? And with Pierre's words about P6 being as good as a podium, effectively comparing this to last year, that he felt over the moon for just being in the bottom half of the top 10, that is a major climb down. It's basically, I think, Gasly saying to the board of Alpine that their car and their team suck and they need someone to actually properly lead it. But I must point out that I think these comments are not aimed at the rank and file members of Alpine, the trackside team, the pit crew, all that stuff. The people who do their best to try and make the car as good as it can be. No, he's not having a go at them. He's having a go at the suits upstairs. Because I don't think you need me to tell you, what's gone down at Alpine feels like what would normally go down at Ferrari, but at triple speed. He and Franco, they've got no means of figuring out where the team is going right now. They haven't got a stable platform, and the British media, including many pundits on YouTube and myself, we've been really tearing them to shreds, the British ones specifically, really going after Franco after just idly dismissing Doohan. I really did detect a certain amount of apathy, whereas with Colapinto, oh, they're going for the jugular. It's absolute chaos, and it just feels like the second seat curse of Red Bull has infected the general media, that anyone who is underperforming is right up for the chop. But anyway, the team right now, Alpine, are looking for somebody with a proven track record and someone who's currently available, and Christian does tick both those boxes at the very least. Especially since I think the original plan may be to sell the team to the Mazepins via High-Techs. That means things were above board, relatively speaking. Yeah, that completely fell through, and this is going to be plan B. And don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with the details about how Christian and Flavio, they're good friends. We already know that. They work closely together with the whole situation with Fota back in the day. They've got good things to say about each other, and that's pretty much it. But that political cover with Flavio, yeah, that would certainly help. There's also the stuff I mentioned earlier, like the Ferrari factor, Pierre's plea, but there's also some really interesting and probably enticing reasons why Horner would take this deal should he have unfinished business. But to be fair, after 400 races in charge of Red Bull, Horner does have little left to prove. He could easily just go off into retirement. This would be, if he went to Alpine, a sort of New Game Plus run, as the gamers would say. And then there's also the ideal situation about where Christian is located and how close the Team Enstone Alpine factory is to his native Banbury, that's Enstone. It's about 35 minutes or so by car, and that's maybe about 10 minutes, 15 minutes less than it would take to get from his home to Milton Keynes, and it would be through the countryside. It would be a very scenic route, far less stressful than going on the main roads. And speaking as somebody who used to make a 90 to 100 minute commute, that's not a round trip, that's just one way to northwest London from my deepest, darkest Hampshire base, where I used to live. Just shaving off 10 minutes makes all the difference. It's the little things here, people. The fact that Christian wouldn't have to change anything, he wouldn't have to move his kids to different schools, they wouldn't have to find a new home. It would be absolute quids in, really. Nothing changes except you go a different direction in the morning. And also, I think Alpine would offer him something that Red Bull ultimately wouldn't give him after years of trying after the death of Dietrich Mateschitz. Total control. The door, as far as I'm concerned, is open for him to just take what he wants. Alpine have got no qualms about that, I reckon, and Briatore is looking for a man who he sees eye to eye with, which is exactly that, and I would easily imagine in a few years' time, Horner could maybe manipulate Alpine into the image of a team that he wanted, and that there's no bigger upper management that would be impacting him or impeding him like he got at Salzburg, and the support he lost from the Thai side of the business. That meant a lot in terms of his dismissal, I reckon, I suppose. Yeah, Alpine, I don't think there are such restrictions, because clearly what he wanted at Red Bull was too much to bear for the Austrian side anymore, amidst the crisis talks with Max Verstappen that are likely going on right now, and the slip in performance through multiple staff departures, missteps with contracts, the obvious negative media spiral downward the team had to endure for many years. The writing was on the wall after 2 decades in the job. For Alpine, I don't think that's a concern at the moment, because right now they're already in the toilet in terms of public perception. Either people don't really look to them well because of Flavio, or they are relatively anonymous in most weekends through just simple lack of pace and then being right at the back. Stuff that we were accusing Sauber of last year. They became the tractors of the season, which Alpine is very much being accused of right now. The tractors. They don't want to be tractors. But they are a team in flux at the moment. They're giving up their Renault power, so a lot of their Frenchness is disappearing, even though they are still managed by a French operation, but then they're taking German power units, they're based in the UK. It's kind of like the criticism Haas had been dealing with for a while, as in, they've got a UK base, they've also got an Italian one, their main offices are in North Carolina in America. Where are they? What is their identity? And their definition for existence is very blank right now, other than maybe to make some money. You might be thinking, surely Flavio wouldn't want somebody to get in the way. He might just want to run the show himself, and the Renault board, the Renault group, doesn't really seem to be having any issues, even though they're currently looking for a CEO who might have an issue with him. But then at the same time, you've got to remember, the guy's 75. He doesn't want to be doing this on the daily, so therefore, get somebody he trusts. Christian. But can he actually do much Christian with this team? I think so, if he does choose to come back into Formula 1, because again, he's pretty much done everything possible for a team principal to do. He doesn't have to come back to Formula 1. He could just straight up retire, take the money that Red Bull gives him in terms of compensation, and then just fade away into obscurity. But I do think Alpine may have some opportunities to acquire his services, because after them dropping their engine program, this team is not exactly short on cash. Yes, ditching their work status will do that, even though that would certainly make Pierre Gasly cringe a little bit. Even though he has walked back those comments, I'm pretty sure he does miss the fact that Alpine will no longer be a works team come 2026. It just means that a money pit of theirs for many, many years no longer exists. That money can be spent in other departments. And if Horner did take up the job, then it would be because of his imposition of an engine freeze to make sure Red Bull powertrains, his baby over at Red Bull, which he won't get to oversee. And it did mean that Renault fell back even more because they couldn't improve the engine. It just feels really weird that the instigator of that and Renault's ultimate exit of Formula One is now coming to lead the team. Anyway, not having to spend money making your own engines and instead taking Mercedes parts gives more wiggle room as Renault are continuing to push the Alpine brand with a wide range of cars and their fairly solid showing in WEC, which in of itself is on a tear in regards of popularity. They got in at the right time, Alpine, and the team is doing all right over there, actually. They would surely want their F1 team to be good too, because as I've witnessed in online discourse, we've heard many people say, oh, get the world endurance manager of the Ferrari team to come over to replace Vasseur. He'd be great because he's winning in that category. Well, doesn't necessarily mean he'll be winning in the other category as well, but I think they would ideally, Ferrari, like both entities to be running well, instead of one carrying the other, or comparisons being made. I think the same thing would apply to Alpine, to a lesser extent. Now, here's one thing I brought up in my Max Mercedes video I did on Friday that I think would also apply here in terms of negotiations. Something that would really make Christian Horner come to the table, and something that Red Bull never afforded him but his arch-rival got in spades at the right time. A financial stake in the team. For Christian, that would be the holy grail. It would just mean that Christian's job would be a lot more secure, since it would be a lot more complicated to get him out of the position if he had some skin in the game. Because you got to remember, at Red Bull, he was only an employee. He was only ever an employee. The CEO of Red Bull Racing, the team principal, sure, very high in terms of power, but a person who is still employed by somebody else from a head office in Salzburg, which means that he could be fired at any moment, which is exactly what happened. So yes, I think if Christian were to come back into Formula One, he would accept nothing less than having at least a small slice of the Alpine pie. Alpine. Now granted, I doubt Renault would be willing to give him a third of the team like with Toto, because that would mean gifting hundreds of millions of dollars to him. Toto got at the right time when the team and F1 were far less rich than they are today, so effectively, Wolff is a paper billionaire. It would depend on how much Renault is willing to part with in discussions with Horner, and how much they need him. And this is something I found out via Coffee Corner Motorsport, that Christian Horner's management team is the same team that actually manages his wife, Jerry Halliwell, and many other celebrities, David Beckham, and I think Rihanna as well, and at one point Lewis Hamilton. So they have some very high-profile clients, so Christian got in with the right people, which means that any discussions with Red Bull in terms of a severance package or compensation, it's going to be long, protracted, and maybe in his favour. Because I have heard reports that maybe it could be a £50 million golden parachute, and you might not think it's fair after what he's been accused of, but that is business really, because I think his contract was meant to be lasting through 2030. This has been terminated 5 years early, and this is all to do in relation about, I think he got like £8 to £9 million a year for being team principal, so, you know, 5 years paid, please. But then there are also some other things we've got to consider with before he could maybe sign on the dotted line with Alpine and get his exit from Red Bull proper, because he's still within the fold. He's a director, but he's one of those directors that's just in the corner somewhere, in the dark. He'll get paid by Red Bull still, not much, but something, but it means that he is outside of the hiring and firing pool. And let's not forget about that tribunal. Now, since I'm from the UK and other UK outlets can't really discuss the details of this investigation due to legal reasons, this is still something that may take place. It might be settled out of court before it actually takes place in January, but it's still a topic for discussion. But throughout all of this, I think based on things that have been going down, it's not something that will result in him being banned or sanctioned by the FIA, since this has got nothing to do with any sporting rules that he's flagrantly broken. This isn't like a crash gate or anything like that. It's not affected how Formula One goes racing, but it could be a bone of contention regarding things that go around racing, like acquiring sponsors. So yes, in terms of the outcome, it may not matter to Horner whether or not he gets a job in Formula One, but the optics will still very much matter, and they have been mattering, because even though those 2 Red Bull investigations a year or so ago meant that he was cleared, that stink still did not wash from him. Many people condemned him forever, regardless of what they actually came up with, the judges, their verdict. Then, of course, there's the gardening leave. How much is he going to have to serve before he can join another Formula One team, especially going into a very important year? I don't think Red Bull would want any of their secrets being given to Alpine, which could easily benefit them in the long run. And again, he's still employed by Red Bull. He is not free to think about other employment options. It really depends on whether or not Red Bull will be prepared to actually, terminate him 100%. Now, typically, senior representatives have to serve 12 months or so, sign various NDAs, and then they can go and find other, non-compete clauses, etc., although they can be negotiated, which is, I think, what happened with Adrian Newey, which meant that he could join Aston Martin that little bit earlier than many expected. I heard initial reports when Newey announced he was leaving Red Bull that he couldn't join in Formula One again until 2027. But incoming in March 2025 meant that some kind of deal was brokered, which may happen here. Maybe Horner and his legal team discuss a shorter period of gardening leave in exchange for less of a lump sum that Red Bull would have to fork out. It would be a bind for Red Bull, since they wouldn't want to give secrets, but they would have to part with less money potentially, which might be better spent on other things within the team as part of their refresh. 50 million is a lot of money to give up in this critical phase of the sport, so not having to part with as much would be nice. And also, it would get Christian Horner away from them entirely. If they're looking to really rejuvenate themselves into a different Red Bull Racing, which has different morals, values, and ethos. But then there's things from F1 Insider and F1 Oversteer that are saying that there have been qualifying clauses, which means that Horner doesn't have to serve any gardening leave at all. That once Red Bull completely terminates his contract with them as a director over in the shadows, then he could just go over to Enstone and say, "Hey, Flavio, what about a job? Give us a job," and then they will just announce him tomorrow. Now, that's not been fully confirmed from various sources, it's just from those two publications, but I thought I would mention it in terms of the conversation. We don't know for sure how much gardening leave Christian will have to serve, if any, but it is a topic of discussion. But these discussion topics are very much proving that there are plenty of hurdles to jump over before we get a complete resolution. Is he going to go to another team, or is he just going to sidle off into the darkness and we never hear from him again? Until the next season of Drive to Survive. But should he come up with a deal which means that maybe he gets to join Alpine come 1st of January 2026, we'll get some sort of announcement a few months before he actually takes up his first day in the office, kind of like with Adrian Newey. He was announced in September 2024, he started in March 2025. And much like with Aston Martin gaining the best technicians, the engineers, researchers, and many other people up and down the pecking order, I think Alpine are trying to do the same thing, albeit with less spangly fancy facilities, on a smaller scale. But they are very much in a position that they will do just about anything to regain some sort of traction, albeit without the clout of Papa Stroll. But that might not matter for Horner, because he's got all the money in the world, he's got all the accolades that any person in Formula One could possibly want as well, so for this could easily be just a extra challenge, something that he can do with his remaining time, and starting from the ground up again, because he probably remembers those days rather fondly, 2005, 2006, buying up the failed project from Ford's Jaguar division. He may wish to take all the things that he learned in his 20 years at Red Bull and then apply it to Alpine, at least try and get them some sort of traction. And Gasly's words that I talked about at the top of the video, they're just the tip of the iceberg for Alpine, because the team that he joined a couple of years ago, that no longer is a thing. It doesn't exist. And his career is hanging by a thread right now, and it's especially galling that his arch nemesis Esteban Ocon goes over to Haas, and sure, they're not exactly the most competitive team out there, but he's a darn sight happier than he was with Alpine, so yeah, Esty Bestie got the last laugh in a way, at least for now. Haas look happy, Alpine do not. But maybe with Christian they could be happy again, because his CV does contain a mix of commercial firepower, political clout, high-tempo operational craft, things that Alpine have never enjoyed at once. Again, the results of the tribunal, if it takes place, will very much impact what Christian Horner does. If he is found guilty, then it will certainly make many sponsors that would maybe consider going with Alpine just run in the opposite direction. But as it became clear in the wake of Christian Horner's departure and his departure speech being leaked online, which I think was not fair because that's meant to be for the employees alone and not for our ears, there were many, as quoted by many publications, rank and file members of Red Bull Racing that valued Christian highly and were very sad to see him go. They were just as shocked as their boss was. But despite that, there is still a level of controversy surrounding their former TP, which would mean trying to find brands to work with for that team might be a little bit more tricky. But given that Flavio has got plenty of controversy around himself, does he really care about that? No. He would just tell those sponsors that don't want to work with him to foxtrot Oscar. He'll just find companies elsewhere that will be more than happy to work with the Formula One team. And even though there are plenty of people out there that hate Christian Horner's guts, there are also an equal amount of people, if not a bigger amount of people, that love drama in Formula One. And Christian Horner, oh, he's all about drama. Many people lamenting that with Christian gone, who's Toto going to be poking fun at? And saying that, oh, you know, they're absolutely beneath us at Mercedes, we're going to be doing so much better. I mean, we might be able to make do with Zach, but come on, you've got to imagine that the season finale shot is Christian Horner walks in Alpine gear. What? Netflix, oh, they're salivating even just right now. Because from their narrative perspective, it would tie in two narrative strands into one. Because you got to remember, Christian Horner is a very important linchpin in some of their storytelling, as is Alpine, surprisingly. Maybe it's because they got involved very early on as Renault, but if you combine those two subplots into one megaplot, oh, it makes it completely compelling, and Netflix would be adoring this, and Formula One would adore this too, because people will be watching. It's absolute trailer bait. You know that's going in the trailer. And given the fact that there are so many employees at Red Bull Racing that still rate Horner despite all of the allegations held in his direction, this could maybe speed up some kind of brain drain over to Enstone. So Alpine could be getting many former Red Bull employees, skilled Red Bull employees, to bolster up their roster going into a brand new regulation cycle, even more so if Laurent Mekies starts bringing in people from Ferrari, Racing Bulls, or simply put, the rank-and-file Horner supporters just don't like Mekies. It's a big risk Red Bull are taking, but it's a risk they did have to take. Now, of course, the matter of cutthroat practices is something that we do need to consider, because as we all know, the second seat curse at Red Bull was something that came under Horner's watch. But when you compare Horner to Alpine, you get the sense that maybe he might be a slightly fairer barometer, that he'd be more likely to just give people a chance and talk about, well, we're giving them a chance or so, we're doing the best we can, but ultimately they've got to really show up to the party. And then eventually he does run out of patience, but it happens over a good long time, whereas with Alpine, if you don't perform, you get sacked immediately, with no warning. Christian, no matter what, is better than what Alpine's been doing. You just felt with the French team that if they got rid of somebody, it's because they had some sort of vindictive vendetta against them. And sure, you might be thinking that Pierre would not want to work with Christian Horner again, since that's the guy that got him sacked at Red Bull after only 12 races in the job in 2019. But there are various publications from Horner stating that he views the sacking of Albon and Gasly as some things that he does have some regret toward, that he was a little bit too premature in terms of promoting them. He should have given them some more time. And also Pierre could choose to take this in different ways, maybe. He could maybe not want to work with him and leave the team, or maybe use the experience that he's garnered since being at Red Bull Racing proper and show Christian he's a different guy, that he's worthy and ready of joining the team as a leader, which was meant to be the plan over at Red Bull Racing should Max Verstappen gone somewhere else, or maybe them working to be the new Daniel Max situation. So this call for help that Pierre's giving could be a sign that he wants to work with Christian. He might be emboldened by this opportunity. For now, there are still some questions to be had, but Horner to Alpine is looking more and more likely than anywhere else, and Pierre's comments really helped me in my thinking. We just need to see what happens next with the tribunal, and if it actually takes place, or maybe some kind of settlement is come up with beforehand, which might then make an Alpine move less complicated. But come on, Alpine need this to happen, because I don't think anyone else is going to go near that team for the time being that has a lot of things on their own CVs. They need somebody who's completely new to the job and is willing to take up the challenge, or somebody who's available. You look at Alpine and what Red Bull used to be, there are so many reasons for Christian to join, and also a team that's really got nothing left to lose and is willing to make unpopular choices, and Alpine seems to fit the bill in that regard. So long as it makes proper changes and makes the boardroom in France happy, then it's fine by them. Another thing that would keep people happy is more from Audi. That would mean Hülkenberg being in contention for more trophies in the near future. To find out why I think that the podium that they got in Silverstone is a really good sign for Audi's prospects next year, watch this video next, straight after this one.